I worked primarily with kids that were 18 and under who were registered sex offenders or had been incarcerated. And so I was doing psychological evaluations and assessments. Now we would do a battery of assessments with these either youthful offenders or these minors. And it would take anywhere between 4 to 10 hours to do these assessments. Some of the assessments maybe include the clinical interview, which you guys will have some practice with, mini mental exam, sentence completion, which I'll show you, a Wechsler IQ test, a Vinland, trauma symptom review, etc. So there are so many assessments out there, and determining which one is best for your client is very important. I do always encourage you to take the assessments yourselves. The reason for this is that then you know what it feels like to be the client. Assessments can be daunting. They can really exacerbate a lot of your energy, especially if you're working with someone who has trauma. We know that neurologically that changes and shifts the way that we can focus and also the way that we process information. Or if you have someone that you're working with attention deficit or some other form of diagnosis that may interfere with their ability to remain on task. If they're hearing voices, having hallucinations or delusions. We may be looking at psychological or neurological delays that may impact learning or reading, etc. We are also looking at cultural factors that play a role. So when we're doing assessments, we want each person that is taking the assessment to do the best they can to the best of their potential. If we are not getting the best of their potential, we are not getting a correct score. So for example, when I did an IQ test on a kid one time, the child hadn't eaten all day and it was 2 o'clock. So there was no way I was going to get the best potential score that I could out of that child. And so I rescheduled it for a time where when I came in, I actually brought food just in case that happened again. But luckily, the child had eaten, and I did believe that I got the best potential score. Another reason to take the assessments yourselves is to know them. So, for example, there's a standardization that comes along with certain assessments, but then some assessments don't necessarily have a standard way of giving them or getting the information. For example, a trauma symptom review or a mini KID, which is diagnostic in nature. I have those memorized. So I make it more conversational and maybe make it into a game. It depends on the age of the child. It depends on their emotional and social intelligence. It depends on their culture. All of those things play a role in how I'm going to deliver the information and receive the information. And that is so that I get the best potential, right? And so same thing when I would do the MMPI. So the MMPI typically has standard questions that you go through. And often a lot of clinicians give it to the kids or the adults, and then they take it themselves. But in doing that, we have to recognize that it was created a long time ago by primarily white males. And so the wording is very strange. And so depending on the population that I would work with, I would actually alter the way I said something to make it match their language and also make it match the modern era. So that way I was getting the best potential score. So those are just some examples of how we might work with clients using these assessments. It's also important to take them on your own because you also want to learn how to score them. So if you don't know how to score an assessment, it's really difficult to then interpret an assessment. So we need to know how to interpret it. For example, let's say I'm giving a WASI, which is an abbreviated IQ exam, which has been shown to only possibly give an alteration of 2 points here and there to the full scale IQ exam. So I'm giving a WASI, which is the abbreviated IQ, and let's say I'm giving it to a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old, we're looking at the bell curve, right? So we know in the middle of the bell curve is 100, which is average. So this child in particular scores a 75. We know that 70 is the cutoff for cognitive impairment and disability. Okay, so that's what we're looking at about 70. So at 75, we're looking at pretty severe delays or pretty severe learning disabilities or IQ disabilities. Now, I'm also going to look at culture, geographical location. I'm going to look at has the child been in school consistently? What kind of schools has the child been in, et cetera. So I'm going to look at all of those things because those could all impact learning. And then I'm going to look at the score and say, okay, so 75, let's say this child went to school consistently and didn't have any former behavioral issues in school and came from a, maybe poverty level, but not neglectful home, right? So we may look at the 75 and I'm going to interpret that to the adults in the person's life, their caregivers, as severely below average. So not quite at the point where it's considered a legal disability, but we're on the cusp, right? And so that might be how I provide the information instead of giving the score. So when somebody says, I have an IQ of 120, well, what does that mean exactly? Okay, does that mean that you stayed in school consistently and you had a consistent education and you had supportive caregivers and you had, like, what does that actually mean? So what we're actually looking at is, what does this mean for the person that took the IQ test and what can we do to help make it strengths-based, right? So a lot of assessments that are completed, especially when you're doing psychological evaluations and assessments, are not strength-based. So keep that in mind. So some of the things that you will be doing, if you're doing personality assessments, if you're doing clinical interviews, et cetera, they could be strengths-based. But for the most part, we're looking at deficits. Keeping that in mind, we also have to understand that when looking at deficits, in doing the diagnostic evaluation and recommendation for treatments, we don't necessarily want to just look at the symptoms or the diagnosis, because in that case, we're no longer treating the person. So we do want to make it clear also in our recommendations and our treatments that it's important to treat the whole person and not just the symptoms that are being presented by the assessments. Even though it's great data, great information, it's important to understand that it's supplemental to what we're doing with our clients, okay? So I hope that gives you a broad outlook of kind of how assessments can work, what we're looking at, and kind of what you're going to get out of Khan and understanding basic assessment information. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick look at some of the assessments that I've done to help you better understand what they may look like. So the first one we're going to look at is what is called the MMSE, which is the mini mental status exam. So this really measures orientation to time, orientation to place, immediate recall, attention, delayed recall, etc., and any notes that you may have. So here is an example of that. I think it's actually kind of flipped, but at least you can see what it looks like. It's a very simple sheet, nothing extremely difficult. What is the year? What is the month? What is the date? So we're checking orientation to time. Sometimes people with cognitive impairment may not know that. If we're working with someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., we'll understand that orientation to place, immediate recall are going to be a little bit lower. Okay. So another one that you might see that you can give as a clinician as well is, this is an adolescent one, but the sentence completion test. So this is a really fun one to give, and you just have them fill it out, or the way I do it, I like to converse with them as we do it. So it's not as daunting, but it kind of make it into a game. I like blank. I am blank. My teacher's blank. I hardly ever feel blank. And so once we're filling those in, what I'm going to do after we're done is I'm just going to, enjoy it as if it's a game, tell them thank you so much, invite them to continue playing with you. And then I'm going to highlight the themes and patterns that I see. And those are going to tell us a little bit about our clients. And then at the bottom, you can put some comments. Okay, so like on this comment, I put show some true remorse about the offense rather than remorse about getting caught. That's a really important note. So yeah, so that's an example of that. We are running through these a little quickly because I just want to give you kind of a visual. So the next one we're going to look at is the Vinland. Okay, so this is what a scoring sheet on the Vinland Adaptive Behavior Scale might look like. Now the scoring can look really confusing and overwhelming, especially when you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all this information? So each section is scored by number on this. So see, you have all these scores and it tells you to continue, and you're really just adding them up to get your raw score. So at the bottom, it has your raw score, your ceiling item, when did you stop scoring, etc. So it's all written out for you. Now, when all of that is done, you would consider going to the scoring sheet and look at the different domains. And so we would fill in the boxes, and that will tell us the raw score. Okay, so once we have the raw score, though, you have a book, and it will tell you the V scale score based on the raw score. And basically in the back of all of these books, like IQ tests, the Finland, the RAT, which is for education, etc., they will have all of the scores and all the math pretty much done for you. It is so important, though, to understand what a V score is, or what a standard deviation is, and what that means. Okay, and so we're looking at more of like vocabulary and understanding what it means in the data so that we can best interpret it. That will help you with your treatment recommendations. Again, I know this sounds very overwhelming. I am not really a math person. I don't enjoy math very much, but I'm good at it, and I really love it when I can see it on paper. So when it is visual research data or diagnostic data, it makes sense to me. And so that's why it's also really important to start looking at these assessments and scoring them accordingly. So then it tells you your adaptive level based on your score. So it gives you your confidence intervals and then your adaptive level. So we know that this person's receptive domain was low, expressive domain was low, written domain was low, communication was low, personal was above average, and then domestic was above average, but in every other category was low. And so that's how we might interpret the data, instead of saying, well, they scored a 29 and then the V score was 7, which made the confidence interval 1. You know, like that doesn't make sense to a lot of people if they're not familiar with the assessment. So instead, we're going to say in receptive, expressive, and written expression, we're getting low scores, which means they're below the average population and being able to do those things. Much easier. So that's the Vinland 2 that we've given. So then we have things like the house tree person, which is a projective test. Again, there are scoring ways to score that, but for the most part, it's based on interpretation. So here's one, for example, that I very lightly interpreted, like this would mean organicity and immaturity, the way that the roof is, things like that, how high the windows are matter, the smoke coming out of the chimney, things like that. And then the tree, you know, house tree. Then we have the person. And so the person I put, I always ask about the person. Tell me about your person. And this person said, I don't know, 10 years, gangsta geek. So we have that. And then I would interpret that appropriately. Spiky hair usually means slight aggression. Hands are showing, so the person may feel like they have access to resources. There's a lot going on that we can decipher. And again, this is why training is really important in these areas, because we don't want just random interpretations of the person. And then we have the other person. I don't know, 16 years old, happy, as we can see, lots of cleavage. This person was particularly drawing a pregnant woman. So, okay, so the next one that we did was a trauma symptom review for adolescents. And I'm showing you the adolescent ones because it's the most confidential ones. So these things, for example, there's part 1, so month, you know, feeling sad, losing your temper, and you score it within the last month, like never, once or twice, sometimes, lots, most of the time. And then we're going to add up all those scores in each subsection. And then this is what the scoring would look like. So as you can see, you have each space and it tells you exactly where to put the score. and then the total. Okay, so we have total trauma exposure, caretaking, psychological maltreatment, caretaker unavailability, peer rejection, negative bias, positive bias, anxiety, depression, anger, attachment, sexual issues, dissociation, tension, social withdrawal, etc. So I really like the trauma symptom review. Covers a lot of things. So there's that. So another one, so the RAT is another one that we use, and I'll show you a scoring sheet. So we have word reading, and then we'll have sentence comprehension, spelling, math, computation. So as you can see, most of the scoring sheets look the same. We have the raw score, the standard score, the confidence interval, and then we have the percentile rank. And that's it. And that's how we would write it into the data into our diagnostic or interpretive reports. Then we have something called the Bender Gestalt, which is where they recreate these shapes. So you have them look at the card and they draw the shapes, and then you have them do a recall. So based on memory. So here is a copy, like copying the shapes. So that's their copy of the shapes, and it does get harder. And then this is their recall. So this is all they could remember. And then we score it. And see, even within the scores, you can see how we did it over here based, and again, in the back of the scoring manuals, it'll be based on their age. So we know this age was 16 years old and 4 months and 24 days. So that will tell us how to score it and what sections they're in. So total raw score, 21. Standard score is 71, percentile rank 2.66, T-score 31. So we got low to low average. So we wouldn't necessarily put the exact numerical data into the report. Instead, we would put they were in the low to low average range. Okay, so that is an easier way to interpret the scoring. Yeah. Okay. So then we have the Rorschach, and a scoring on the Rorschach, you'll have the pictures of the Rorschach, which I cannot show you on video because a lot of the assessments that I have, I can't really show on video because it would be an ethical violation because it's copyright. But I will show you what it looks like to have the scores. So here was one that I scored, and what you would do is put the responses. So here's card number 1. So I said, what do you see? And the person said a face. I said, okay, what else do you see? Or is there anything else that you see? And those have to be standard the way you state that. And then their second response was wings. So they also said that it was white in color and gave me the shape. So I specifically said in my inquiry what it was based on: shading, shape, color. Sometimes if there's an aggressive score, it'll be like blood, gore, things like that. And those are special scores. So then I could hand interpret and score the Rorschach, which I have done several times. It takes like 6 hours. It takes a very long time. So there's also a computer-based scoring that you can do. And the reason why I did a hand-based scoring at first is because I wanted to compare it to the computer-based scoring to see if I was doing it without a biased lens. And my scores were very, very, very similar. So that was exciting. But the scores based on the Rorschach were confusing coming out of the computer, but then they have the interpretive scan. So in the interpretive scan, you'll see key variables and aspects, and it will kind of describe the interpretation for you. So a lot of the assessments now have that. So reality testing, conventionality, motivation, etc. And it'll tell you things like there's evidence of moderate to severe ego impairment that leads to failures in problem solving or ineffective idiosyncratic thinking. So it's really helpful that these that we've created computer software to help us input the data and the scoring that we learn how to do, and then interpret it for us. So that was a lot of information. And I hope now that at least you have a semi-visual of the different ways and different scoring methods that some of these assessments might look like, the ways you can use them, and also an idea of how learning and understanding how to interpret the score is most important.